I'm gonna teach you guys how to do drum and cobia. So we're gonna be talking about drum fishing to start off. That's gonna show up about April 15th. You'll start getting them around the shoals. And then once you hit like May 1st, that kind of really picks up after that. You're gonna want to get you a fish finder rig. This is a basic rig right here. You want it about, a foot long, because you want that, when you put a weight on it, you want it on the bottom. You don't want it, you put a long leader on, your bait's gonna get like that up in the current. You're gonna want that weight to hold that bait down like that. So I use these conventional reels with the lever drags. You get a star drag. If you start getting a bite, it's kind of hard to start cranking on it, you know what I mean, to get that drag set. So as soon as I get a bite and he starts running, I can slowly push it up to the drag that I want. So that's the easiest way to do it, instead of sitting there, and then if he feels that tension, he can spit that hook, if you're trying to mess with it. And I use a 65-pound braid with a 60 to 80-pound leader on it. I just use Bill Fisher on that with a 8/0 circle hook. You're gonna want a blue crab, and you pop that top shell off and you cut them right in half. And a lot of the times I'll leave all the legs on there too, so it looks more natural to the drum. It gives it more scent. And I'll fish usually 8 or 6 rods when I'm doing that, and you're just waiting for a little bite like that. If you start getting like stuff like this, that's like croakers. If you start seeing your rod just get messed with, just crank it in. You're gonna have to rebait when it's done. Those are what we call pickers, just croakers, roundhead, stuff like that. But when you see a drum bite, it'll be more subtle like that, and it'll just sit there and pounce on it and just start. I'll pick the rod up when I see that. I'll pick it up and I'll point it at him, so there's no resistance at all, and I'll put it in free spool, and he'll start taking off slow, and then when he starts going fast, that's when I'll slam it up and I'll lift the rod. You don't need to set the hook with the circle hooks. Usually when you set the hooks, you'll end up ripping it out of their mouths, or you'll miss the fish. And the same thing when you're cobia fishing. For these two, you're gonna be doing, it's the same rig, but you'll put an eel on it instead of a piece of crab, or you can put a piece of bunker on there. The difference with the cobia is when you're chumming, you'll get you a chum pot like this, and what I like to do, I'll put one on the bottom and one up top. The one that's on bottom, you want to weight it down to where it's right below your boat. All right. And for the drum, you're gonna want the current moving pretty strong. It doesn't matter, if it's smoking out, they like a lot of current. For the cobia though, you're gonna want like the last 2 hours of that tide. You want it slow. You don't want it ripping out because your chum's just going everywhere. You want your chum consistent to right around that same, general area that you're at. A lot of the times when you drop it down to the bottom, I'll put 2 eels like right on the pot. And I'll drop it right here. You got to make sure though that your eel's not getting wrapped up in your rope or in your pot. You got to keep it far enough away, but close enough to where it's still in that chum slick, down current of that. Because all those fish are going to do, they're going to be sitting on this pot. They're going to be eating the pinfish, the croakers, the roundheads that are eating your pieces of chum that are coming out of there. That's all they're doing. So usually, if you put this down, you put a rod right on it, you're going to have a bite in a minute or so if they're there. And then when that happens, best thing to do is just to rip up that chum pot, get it out of there so that fish doesn't wrap around that chain or your rope and end up busting you off. And usually when you get a cobia on, he's going to shoot to the top. That's how you'll know if it's a cobia. Most of the time when you hook them, they're going to come right up and scope out. And then when you guys are doing that, make sure you have like either a live bait or a bucktail rod too, because usually when he comes up, there's going to be some other fish with him.
Cast past it and come back.
If I see a fish, I'll try to cast like 10 to 15 foot in front of him, and you don't want to crank it. You know what I mean? When you get him, you want to cast it and crank it, buzz it past his face. You'll get him to turn on it. Then when you get him to turn, you do big jigs. I'll jig it like this, and then when I see them, you'll see them load up. If you pay attention, they're like sit there like a cat, about to pounce. And you jig, and then he'll turn on it, and he'll swipe at it and miss it. If I see him start swiping at it and missing it, I'll do slow jigs. You know what I mean? Then still taking line. Yep. You don't want that jig to go out of sight. You always want to see your jig, because you could go out there, throw it, You're cranking it, and then a lot of people do, oh, he's on it, and they'll stop reeling, and they'll just jig, and that jig sinks down to the bottom. You can't see what that fish is doing. So you could be jigging it when he's about to go for it, and he's just gonna keep missing, and then you crank it to the boat, and it's gonna come up vertical, and the fish is gonna come up next to the boat and go away. You wanna keep it to where you can see it, and then crank a little bit, see it, crank a little bit, but you wanna keep that jig up. Keep it up, and if you want, a lot of times I'll let it disappear for like a split second, to where I'll let it go to where I can't see it, then I'll do a big jig and he'll come up after it. You know what I mean? Like it's trying to get away. You just want to make it look like it's trying to get away from that fish. The bucktails I use are the boat up ones. It's just my preference on them. I love them. I think this one's probably had 15 fish on it. I mean, and they'll get beat up, you know, and they'll go away like that. You know, usually they got, you know, little tails and everything. You don't need to throw them out if they get that bad. What you can do is you just get a grub tail. You put a grub tail on it. Or you could even, a lot of my buddies will put tube squid on it. So when that fish hits, he doesn't taste a bucktail. He'll taste fish and he'll come back. So just in case you miss that fish or he gets stung, he's gonna taste it and be like, oh, I'm gonna come back, it's fine. And he'll come back and eat it. The other thing you want is you want your drag super tight for bucktails. You want it as tight as you can get it, because when that fish hits and that rod loads up, you don't want him to be able to spit it. You want it to pull no drag and just boom, hook up, do 5 or 6 good pumps into them, so to drill it farther in so it doesn't come out, and then you can start fighting the fish. They'll start showing up around here. I'll start catching my first ones off the ocean front about May 12th. So as soon as they start catching them in Carolina, you can have like 2 or 3 days and you start catching them here. You're not gonna see a bunch of them, but you'll see some fish, and it's usually the more mature fish that don't care about the water temperatures. They know where they need to go. They know where they're going to go spawn. They've already done it, you know, for years and years. They know what they're doing. But the water temperature you want to look for is anything over 65 degrees. 65 is like their lowest that they'll stay in. And you want clean water. You don't want to go in there and it looks like, you know, the Mississippi mud's dumping out after a rainstorm. All that fresh water, that's what you're seeing. It's all fresh water from the rivers after rain. That's going to push all the fish down. All of a sudden you'll see a bunch of fish and the tide will change and the water gets dirty and you stop seeing fish. It's because all the fish went down to the bottom and they're 10 foot down, just a higher salinity level. All the fresh water is going to be up top. I picked up these rods this year and I loved them. They're a lightweight Shimano Terramore. They're the 8-footers. They're giant, but it's easy. You can sling it out farther. And then have you guys ever cobia fished before and had it to where you're throwing at a fish and all of a sudden the eel gets ripped off the hook? That's usually your rod's too stiff. See how this is like flimsy? When you whip it like that, usually it's just an instant snatch on that eel and it'll rip through that soft tissue. But I use the 8/0 J-hook with 65-pound or 50-pound braid. And then I'll start using fluorocarbon too when it gets into the later years. When it gets later in the year, you know, the fish start getting spooky, they're pressured, the water gets cleaner in August. You know, you pull up to the poles, you can see like 15 foot down sometimes on the poles. You want to get the fluorocarbon. It just give you more of an advantage than the guy next to you. That's all it's doing. But for those, I'll do a big leader on those. And because, you know, if you hook a fish and he's gut hooked, just cut it. And then you still got another one. You don't have to keep retying and retying and retying. So I'll do like a 3-foot leader on my live bait one, just so I don't have to sit there and go through. You're not throwing out 6 inches every time you hook a fish. You can, you know, get 3 or 4 fish out of it like that. And then the main thing is too with those, you're gonna have a tight drag on these. I figured this out. It took me a little bit to figure it out, but with the lighter rod, you got to have it locked so it doesn't pull drag at all, so it'll bury it. Because if you look at it, that's a lot of give until it starts pulling drag. So if you got light drag on it, it'll go into the fish just barely, and then when you start fighting it, if he does a head shake, it'll pull right out. You see a fish, and you kind of want to follow him too. You don't want to just see a fish and all of a sudden take the boat out of gear. You know what I mean? Because they're listening to that motor change. I'll have it to where if I see a fish and he's close, I'll leave the boat in gear and we'll go past him and we'll throw behind the boat. Because they don't care about the boat. There's hundreds of them out there, you know what I mean? They hear the motor all day long. But that change of pitch where you're going from in gear, you know what I mean? They can hear that knock underwater out of gear. And you'll see them spook, go down, and you're like, what the heck, we didn't do anything, we didn't even throw. It's because they can hear that motor change. Or if you're sitting there and the guy's grinding the gear, you know what I mean, to put it in neutral or throw it in reverse really quick, you just let it, you'll see, if I see a fish far out, I'll take it out of gear if he's coming this way and I'll cruise to him. But if he's close, I'll leave it in gear, won't change anything, and we'll just get a quick throw, and it could be behind the boat, just quick throw and just guess to where he's going. And then if I see one far out, just swimming away from us, take your time. You don't need to run up on him. He's not going anywhere. He's going to keep doing that same pattern. Try to get on the outside to get a good cast. Take your time. Don't run up on him, and all of a sudden you got 5 guys throwing bucktails at him and 3 guys are throwing. Get one guy, just make a good cast, get in front of him. You throw it at him, you mess up, you can crank it in, take your time, he's not going anywhere. Just throw it in front of him, and that way you can always lead it. You know, if he's going this way and all of a sudden he hears a splash and he turns a little bit, you still have time to crank it up a little bit to get it past him. So if he's swimming this way, cast it over here, and at some point that bait's gonna go in front of him. You know what I mean? Even if he turns this way a little bit, he'll see it going that way. If he turns this way, you crank it in faster. You want it to be to where you can see him and he's sitting there. You want to be where you're sitting there and you can watch them and you hook up, you know? You just want to watch it the whole time. I'll hold it up, hold it up, hold it up, and then when he eats, I'll free spool it real quick. Or I'll leave it and I'll hold it with my finger. And you can feel that pluck when he does that. You just want to let him eat. And that's it. And another thing too, when you guys are chumming and you get that, the cobia will be the same thing, that thump, thump. You want to feed it to them for about 15, 20 seconds. Because a lot of times they'll pick it up like a dog bone. We call it dog bone in the eel. You guys ever seen that, where the cobias got like that and the hook's on one side? They'll swim like that for a little bit. So you want to give them time for them to swallow it. Because a lot of times they'll pick it up and just start swimming off if there's other cobias around. And then that's the other thing too. If you see a small fish coming at your bait and you see a bigger one, just crank it up really quick. That little one's gonna dart after it and the other one will follow up, and then you can follow it with another bait. You know what I mean? You keep that little one, you can be cranking him in, he'll follow it like a dog on a trail, and he's just going behind it, and the other one will slowly, usually be like 5-6 feet behind it, and that's when you can follow it with another live bait or a jig. That's the main thing. Just constantly have more stuff, because if you hook up, you at least got a backup, or if you're fighting a fish and you look over and another one comes up next to you, you got another one to throw at it. And then also when you guys are sight fishing and you see a fish and you throw at it 3 or 4 times and he's not eating, not going down, just sitting there, you keep throwing, you keep throwing, you keep throwing, he's not going to eat. If I throw at a fish 3 times and he doesn't eat, I drive off, I leave him. Because usually at that time when you guys are keep throwing and throwing and throwing, you see another boat see you stopped up on a fish and they come up next to you, and then all of a sudden you see them hooked up to a fish, you get mad, you're like, what the heck, their fish ate. If you hadn't have been messing with that fish so long, you would have caught that one that was next to it. There's always more fish. When we go fishing, I'll run until I run over 2 or 3 fish, and I'll take the boat out of gear and start fishing in that one spot. If you see 1 or 2 cobias, they're going to be more in that general area, and you just want to stay there. And then the same thing when you guys are going out there, you see mackerels jumping, on the little silver sides and stuff. You just want, that's clean water. Anywhere where there's mackerels or bait, that's clean water, and the cobias are going to be there. Other thing that I like to use is these bowed up poppers. I started using these a lot this year. That's probably about the coolest thing you'll see, because most of the time when you're cobia fishing early June, you'll run across the big schools of reds, 300-400 fish in a school. You'll get probably the coolest bites you'll ever see, because those fish, as long as you don't run that school over, they will stay there. So if you see them, 100 feet away and you're running up on them, take the boat out of gear. Don't rev up the motor. They hear that motor, they're gone. We'll keep the boat in one gear and try to cut them off. You see them going this way, just try to cut them off and then take the boat out of gear and try to beam your cast as far as you can so you're not right on top of that school. That's the main thing. And then with these, you just got to pop it like this, let it sit, pop it, and we'll have 3 or 4 fish trying to eat the same lure. And when they blow up on it, they'll miss it, and they'll lay back down in the water, and they'll come back and hit it again.
The bottom and out the eyeball?
You go under the bottom jaw, out through the eye socket, yes sir. You go through the lip too. That's where a lot of times you'll get them and they'll rip out. You want to go out through the eye, or I've seen some people do it in the tails, but I've seen them also ball up a lot for the people that hook them on the tails. They'll end up shooting backwards up that line. But the main thing is hook them through the hook them through the bottom jaw, out through the eye. And then just keep changing that water. That's the main thing, keep changing that water. The water gets hot, you gotta try to keep it in the shade if you can, like underneath, not on the bow if it's a hot day, underneath the T-top, you know what I mean, in the shade. Just try to keep it somewhere. And that's why I like to use these Yetis too, because because I can't tell you how many times I've had it where the bucket's sliding around, you're trying to like tie up the bucket. These things got the non-skid on them, they're not going anywhere. You put a little bit of water in them, you can't push them around the boat at all. When I fish the bridge, I've got 150 pound and 200 pound braid on my rods for fishing the bridge. And I'll lock that drag down and cup the spool and hold it. And I won't, usually if it's like that, you know, a big fish and we got to drift through this thing, I'm not going to hand off the rod usually to my client, because they're going to end up, you know, they'll drop it because that's a lot of drag on there. Or the fish will go under the boat and they'll have like that and the rod will break going that way. So we'll hold it there and cup it, and I'll throw the boat in reverse and we'll drag that fish, and you'll see them dragging up on top. It'll be a 50 pound fish and you can still drag them across the surface as long as you got, you know, heavy line on there. That's the main thing, is just keep them away. You see them point it towards this way, you're gonna pull them that way away from the bridge and just kind of keep them tight. And then once you get off the bridge, then you can loosen the drag and then fight them. But don't start trying to fight them and everything like that. We lost a big fish last year because of that. We handed it off and I thought it was just gonna come, and all of a sudden he went straight down and he went into the rocks on the pylons, and you could see him and he came back up and you could feel it rubbing. Our line went straight down and you seen our line coming straight up like that, and it was rubbing along a rock pile or a cave that he went under, and we broke him off that way. Fought him for 30 minutes trying to get him to go back through. But I mean, once they go down, you want to keep them up, keep that drag locked. You know, on a smaller fish, you know, 40 pound fish, 30 pound fish, you don't have to worry about it. You can pull them off the bridge, you can fight them in the middle, and then you'll see us a lot, we're doing those spins. We're sitting there doing those circles, because then we can kind of keep it going up, you know, up current. We don't have to drift through, but just keep doing those spins. That stops them from going underneath the boat, going around the motor, breaking you off. You don't have to chase them and run around. Just kind of keep them on one side right there, and you just do a spin around them. Any other questions? You guys good? All right.